All right, folks, welcome back to Mike and Maurice's Mind Escape. We have an excellent episode for you today. We are joined by our buddy Ethan Indigo Smith. We have had him on before a while back. You can go check out that episode. I think we talked about like sacred geometry and Tai Chi and all sorts of interesting stuff on that one. So go check that out if you haven't already. And you can check out his books, The Tao of Thoth and The Matrix of Four. And I'll put a link down below so you guys can head over there and check that out. Before we get started tonight, if you are interested, head on over to our Patreon at patreon.com/MindEscapePodcast. For just $2 a month, you'll get exclusive guest episodes and segments. There's tons of stuff up there. If you listen to our show and you like what we do, and you like all of our guests, there's a chance that we probably did a Patreon segment with the guest on there. I just uploaded stuff with Rick Strassman, Laird Scranton, Laura from Megalith Hunter, you name it. It's pretty much up there. So we've got tons of stuff. From there, you should head on over to indrasweb.org. This is a social media platform that we created to connect open minds. Sign up for a profile today and start hypothesizing, theorizing, whatever you want to talk about in regards to what we talk about on the show. It's a perfect place to do it. And at the end of the month, we will be giving away this Mind Escape t-shirt. And to enter to win, all you have to do is go to Apple Podcasts, leave us a 5-star review, take a screenshot of it, and then email that to mindescapepodcast@gmail.com. And we'll pick a winner at the end of the month. We have a few submissions, so there's a good chance you might win. And we also have a merch store kicking on TeePublic. So if you're interested, I've created some pretty cool designs. Some with some ancient Egyptian themes, some ancient Greece themes. We have a hashtag Let Maurice Speak t-shirt. We have a couple of logo shirts, and just some cool stuff up there. So go check that out. I have the link down below, or you can go to mindescapepodcast.com and hit the merch link. So, but what's going on, Ethan? Welcome back on the show.
Oh, I'm so blessed to be here. Thanks, Mike, Maurice. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us, my man. I remember your episode last time. That was amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I hope we can catalyze some ideas here today as well.
Well, we're gonna get weird, my friend.
I know Maurice was really digging the Tai Chi.
I know. I was gonna ask. Did you get a chance to practice or learn any?
I got to do something, and I'm getting more into meditation and stuff. And when I was talking to somebody today about the comments you were making about how you can't really do anything in your life 100%, and the bending of your body and stuff is in full relation to that, and that's something I've actually pulled from that episode. So again, if I didn't fully grasp every concept, at least I was able to take a little snidbit from that. Michael knows it takes me a little while to grab things. I got to read the book a couple of times. I got to listen to the episodes a couple of times. I'm a little bit slower than he is.
No, I doubt it. I find it whenever I'm sharing Tai Chi, I repeat myself like 20 times and no one realizes it.
Yeah.
Isn't then if you're slower though? I think Tai Chi would be perfect for you, Maurice, because it's kind of slow movement.
Yeah, it's so counterintuitive that by moving slowly, it's almost like by getting in line with gravity at a really such a slow rate, we end up being able to move faster than other things are falling in gravity. So it's interesting, Tai Chi, and it's all about the 70% rule. So if you can take that with you and put that in your back pocket, like you said, you're accomplishing Tai Chi in that mode.
Yeah, it's interesting. Obviously I'm into meditation. I don't know if Tai Chi would be right for me. I'm willing to try anything though, so maybe I'll give it a shot at some point. It's getting kind of cool here, but maybe next summer or spring or something, I'll have some time to give it a whirl. In terms of what we were talking about last time you were on, we were talking about like a lot of like esoteric stuff and just Buddhist ideas and Hindu ideas and all sorts of the spectrum of metaphysics and ancient metaphysics and modern metaphysics. And is there something you've been interested in lately that you find interesting?
Well, I think I've been cursed with an interest in the four idea, to be honest. And that actually, the Matrix of Four really propelled me and enabled me to relate a lot of what was encapsulated on its own distinct ideas. But the Matrix of Four, I find, can associate a lot of the ideas together in a way that is not only revealing of the individual sets, but also of them together, even different relationships that might come out. One major set of four is what is called the four pards or four modes of paradise or two paradise. And this is a way to interpret allegory. And it's from Kabbalistic texts, but it's I think one of these sets of four that is not only usable or applicable to what it's said to be originally designed for, but also can be used in a lot of different ways. So there's four ways to interpret religious allegory, is what it was originally set forth for, but really any concept. There is the literal and allegorical, and then there's the comparative and the secretive. And so, really, any allegory, including, say, the Matrix, because it's become this kind of postmodern allegory, if you will, relating spiritual and scientific in a way that touches on just a broad internal and external psyche, touches our collective and individual psyche. So this set of four can be used to interpret anew and find new ideas in what were already digested allegories or stories. So the four parts really is one of the sets of four that I found through looking into the Matrix of Four that really can propel consideration of things and ultimately consciousness through that.
Yeah, why don't you explain? Isn't there like some sort of like graph or something that shows you the 4 points or what the four different?
Well, I designed that, but there is the Matrix of Four, or the Tetralema, as it's been called, or Kutascoti, is a really old idea, um, essentially using what might be this subtle vibration throughout the universe, because, for instance, the sun symbol is used. The cross is the sun symbol,
Right.
and this is because of the four seasons, and the four seasons happen due to gravity. Whenever there are spheres in orbit of each other, so four seasons are a universal matrix of four. And so it may well have been designed off of that, but also there's this mathematical construct that is kind of like Occam's razor, in that it covers all the bases most simply.
Mm.
In that, and you can utilize it any manner how you like, but the simplest way is there is the A, and there's the B, there's the thesis and the antithesis, and there is the AB, or the synthesis. And then there's probably been different terms for it, but what I call the nullicis, or X. And the nullicis is none of the above, as to be simple. Um,
You
so
mentioned four seasons being this like example, this universal example of, the four. Now, what about somebody that lives in like the desert or the Arctic, where there's maybe only subtle changes? Do you think that those peoples were aware of that as well, or do you think it's only something that's picked up upon people that live in somewhere where the four seasons are kind of glaringly obvious?
Well, I think more than likely it was obvious to the people of times in the past because of the darkness,
Mm,
the light changing schematics. We don't see that in cities as starkly as they would have, and this the winter comes. Even if you're on the poles, there would be a tremendous, like, you wouldn't notice anything, but there'd be the equinox would have 3 days of light,
mm,
right? There'd be a really short season.
right.
Two seasons would be very short. But essentially, you would notice it by the light more than likely. Um, another and I call this the gravity or the orbit set of four, the physical aspect of the matrix of four, in a set of absolutes that I base it on. And it's not an absolute itself, but I base it on absolutes, or maybe absolutes in quotes, because I guess all these things are arguable. But many times there are the three, and there's the unsaid fourth, missing fourth, and with a lot of systems you'll see this. And mind, body, spirit is one of these kind of sloganized trinities that you were all familiar with. But this lacks the fourth part, the unsaid, which is the natural or universal, right?
Mm,
And so I base the mind, body, spirit idea, and I include nature or the universal, and so the a mental aspect of this set of four, and they all have they're all sets of four themselves, is arithmetic. This is an absolute that is actually totally depictive of the duality of polarity, or a cross, because you have the addition, subtraction in one duality, and the multiplication and division in another, right?
mm,
And so for hundreds of years, people have looked for another arithmetic operation. They haven't found it. Now, so there's all kinds of ways to use arithmetic, but there are only four forms of arithmetic. So the matrix of four kind of starts to be this way to perceive uh, uh, totality differently, using things that you're familiar with,
mm.
right? And uh, uh, were you going to say something?
No, I was just gonna say. So, do you think that, like throughout time, like obviously symbols mean a lot to us, and language has influenced our consciousness dramatically. You have, in terms of what you're talking about, math is just another set of symbols. Some would say it's more of, empirical, in a way of like counting, as opposed to maybe even language, where sometimes it's more subjective. Like if you're looking at math, you pretty much know what that stuff means if you know what it means, kind of a thing. But again, there's still symbols, of measurement, or whatever. When you look at, like even some of the philosophers, like Plato and Socrates, used to use mathematics to basically drive home their arguments. Like they would use that to like take the other person down after they've used Socratic method or whatever. That's how they would like deliver the final blows. Now that kind of changes when you get to Aristotle, because Aristotle then diverges and starts to use biology to drive his point home. So do you
Interesting.
think, so based on what you're saying, do you think that's kind of similar, like a shift in consciousness in the way that you perceive the world or the universe around you?
Well, I think we're all subject to our biology, right? Our mortal coil. Like, you can see dogs almost have a transcendent moment sometimes, and then a squirrel goes by, right? And we're like that. So we're pretty directly subject to our biology constraint, our and the impulses that we might have through our biology. I think with the mathematics, it's a way to confirm things outside of maybe the impulsive, or things that aren't necessarily logical, right? But that doesn't refute biological by any means.
Right.
But I think mathematical stuff, mathematical relationships can be not an absolute proof, but more potentially proof. I believe your question reminds me that the Pythagoreans would infamously spit whenever the number two was mentioned,
Mm.
because duality is divisional, right?
Mm.
And we live in a really polarized or dual world where it's us and them, and really we take this polarity construct and put it where it doesn't necessarily need to be or isn't actually, right? A lot of things are by degrees rather than polarity, and so the idea that with the Pythagoreans, that they would spit when they heard the word two is because it's divisive, right?
Mm.
And numerologically speaking, when you have one, then you automatically have two, right? Because you have one and the others,
Right.
right? And so the matrix of four, or four itself, becomes a way to, like a table, find fairness and subjectivity, not opposite-minded, doublethink, polarized constructs, right?
So
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 it,
then what
it
would you say
really,
the main difference between like a tripod and then what you're talking about is?
well, the tripod would have a limitation, whereas the matrix of four with the nullisis has an unlimited alternative,
Mm.
right? For instance, here's a really frequently mentioned trinity, and also frequently used trinity, that lacks the matrix, excuse me, the fourth part, that has it as a matrix of four, that makes it a freeing concept rather than a limiting. Almost, it's used as an enslaving idea. People accuse institutions of using the Hegelian dialect as a way to keep people constrained, right?
Mm.
And the Hegelian dialect is thesis, antithesis, and our preconceived result, right? The
Right.
synthesis, right? And even Hegel himself actually used a different system, and it is kind of given credit for that, the what is called now the Hegelian dialectic. Another gentleman, I forget his name right now, actually proposed that, and Hegel himself called it a lifeless schema, I believe was the exact term. And so nullicis, in respect to the Hegelian dialectic, says no, none of that. For instance, like with energy, it's a really obtuse problem. The energy oligarchy has, oil or nukes. I shouldn't probably bring that up because it's
Yeah, it's whatever.
social, political. But right where there's one thing or another, actually, our whole the dual, left wing, right wing is about that, right? But the nullicis would be something completely outside the box, for instance. So
Do you think that's a problem? Because I mean, I think the problem is people just aren't trying to be creative any excuse me, be creative anymore. They're not, like you said, thinking outside the box. They're not. They think some of people think they are. And I mentioned this a couple episodes ago, but if you like look at somebody in the comment sections on social media, they think they're having some like sort of epiphany or groundbreaking idea, and there'll be literally 5 other people after them saying the exact same thing around the same, time marker or whatever. So really, it's not that original. So like for me, it's like I've always tried to think of whether it be, psychoactive compounds or meditation or lucid dreaming, like how can I break free of these these tendencies or these causal lines of creativity, and how can I break free of that and kind of go somewhere else, if that makes sense.
Well, it's almost like, how can we be like Neo in the Matrix, right?
Hmm.
How can we break free of the fetters of our very own consciousness? And it's so funny that we're so caught up in dualism. If I were outside, I would spit, because I think it is the divisional, dual aspect that causes these cliches that you're referencing, right? It's being one-sided, right, compared to the other side, and then you're not seeing the complete taiji, if you will, right? How even of course, across, it's a mathematical certainty that two lines intersecting make 4 points. And also, the yin yang ball is made up of the two swirls and the two dots within the swirl.
Hmm.
Each swirl. Also, I dare say every creation mythology or story, but pretty much every creation mythology story has aspects of the matrix of four built into it. Certainly, the Garden of Eden has the masculine and feminine, and the godliness and the detractor of godliness in
Hmm.
it,
We were
right?
just talking
And
about this. I think that's actually has a lot of relevance, because if you're even the Gnostic view of that to simulation theory, or kind of what we're talking about with like the Matrix.
right, and actually, the allegory of the cave predates the biblical, not necessarily the where the Garden of Eden might draw its have other sources from, but the allegory of the cave is older than the biblical story of the Garden of Eden,
Yeah, I mean we're
and
talking about like 300s BC versus
yeah.
way later. So um
And so, in the allegory of the cave, there are also the four archetypes as a basis, right? There's the chained and the unchained, right? Those that are stuck as prisoners, and those that are transfixed by the images that are put forth by the captors, which are the third type. And then there's the freed prisoner, who is archetypally Neo, and also Winston Smith, and also you and I, right? We're all
mm,
trying to break through the caverns of consciousness many times during our lives, and so forth. Um, but most directly, it's Neo, right? And it's all, Neo is reflective of the Christ consciousness coming about too. And so it's you can find these different sets of four all the time, leading to uh, consciousness development. And another one of the oldest symbols on the planet, and it's we speak it, but it doesn't even have a spelling, is Om,
mm,
right? And it's reflective of the four states of consciousness as well. Sleep state and dreaming state are the main two, and the secondary polarity, the duality of polarity in that construct, is the deep awakening and deep dreaming.
that's
um,
interesting.
and later in recently, as we've kind of taken what are these religious, theological, archetypal, symbological stories to relate consciousness and our psyche, right? And now we're really people are exploring the psyche with different terminology. We can find more of the matrix of four. And again, just like the Matrix, it's all about the story of our consciousness development, right? And so, like, when we're learning something like Neo, he is at first we're what they call incompetent what is it unconscious incompetence, right? And this is the conscious competence model. And at first we're unaware of our inability, right? And then as we try things, we're now conscious of our incompetence. And as we expand, we become consciously competent. And then we get to a performance where, as a martial artist like Neo, is unconsciously competent, right? Where he could be, smoking a cigarette, riding the bike, and writing a poem, chewing gum at the same time, right? You're completely unconscious of your competence,
Right.
and so this learning model is another correlative that the neo development ascension process symbology kind of has, that is also in the matrix of four. um,
Yeah, no, that's interesting. Um, in terms of like back to like a little bit of the simulation theory aspect of it, um, do you personally have any thoughts on like do you think that this could be a simulation or like even like Plato's theory of forms or something like do you think that there's some other realm or a more perfect realm or if you simulation theory maybe that there's a creator that coded us or something along those lines?
well, I know that I can't say for certain, but
Well, of course, I'm just asking your
well,
opinion.
no, I'm no, I don't. I'm just that's just always how I
Dude, I want
uh,
the
uh
answers, man. Tell
yeah.
me what's going on.
Well,
Don't be lying down.
what I was gonna say is that much more adept and wise folks than I have again, and going back to the ancient theological spiritual stuff, at least through the Matrix of Four. But it doesn't have to be the Matrix of Four. It's applicable to some things, not everything. But in this sense, I think that there's many different teachings that put forth this, but the Kabbalah idea of the four dimensions of the tree of life basically says that from the most subtle is the origins, right? And what is the most subtle to us is actually the most real when we're truly capable of perceiving what is real.
Hmm.
And so I think it's possible, and I think maybe there's one thing that's happening that's interpretable as multiple truths as well. But I think that kind of idea that from the most subtle, whether it's mechanized and consciousness and that type of illusion, or if it's we're all in the meditation of a great God, that type of illusion. I'm not sure, but I think that it is originating from the most subtle, and then coming down into what we consider the most physical.
Yeah, I mean, you could look at it different ways. You could look at it kind of how you're talking about, almost like an analytical way. You have like a theoretical physicist like Nick Bostrom who says if we continue with technology at this pace, it's inevitable that we'll reach some sort of stage that reality will be indistinguishable from these other technological realms. So you have something like that, and then you
If
could
that's
look
the
at
case, then we don't know who's the
right,
one that created it in the first
right,
place.
and
We
then
could
the
be a
other
generation 10 from this,
option would be kind of what you're talking about, almost like we're God's art or something like that, or some creator's art, and we're just fulfilling some sort of um, thought process, or just some aspect of it, some abstract aspect of it.
Yeah, and maybe the more in tune we are with things, and to get there, the less subject we are to our physical impulses and constraints of our body, which it's like a simple thing to say, right? But the more we can detect, the more subtle, like again, what Neo depicts in dodging the bullets, right? He knows where they're going before they're fired, right?
Mm.
And so there's this whole I think we're kind of touching on this potential for intuition, because where are the flickers of intuition coming from when it's something like that, when it's uh, uh, detected beforehand, right? And acted on. And so is it that we're in touch with the subtle just a little bit more, or is it before what is occurring? I think it's just getting in touch with the more subtle layers of things. It doesn't even seem like before that way.
Right. Yeah. That's interesting. Um,
Uh, I was going to add to that.
sure.
There's Neo depicts the ascension process, and in that, Tai Chi is a wonderful way to do this. But there's all kinds of ways: meditation, and even probably just being aware of the divisional of the doad, right? You get rid of the two aspect and pursue something else rather than divisional. So there's many ways to develop, but there's a noted set of three again, that I think has an unsaid four, and that's physical therapists and physical athletes use this idea. Is first, there's interoception, which is understanding our own body and our own mechanics and the potential of our body and so forth, the balance, and then there's exteroception, and that's understanding the gravity and the other forces, the trees, the persons, and so forth. And then there's proprioception, and that's just a fancy word for being able to put together our conceptuality of ourselves. And in Neo's case, when he's fighting what's his name, the trainer teaching him kung fu, right? He's learning
Orpheus.
how to Morpheus, duh, of course. And so he's learning how to deal with himself and the opposition. And then there's this word is not so common in the lexicon. There's what I call pre-proprioception, and that is when Neo starts blocking Morpheus before it's in reaching, and before it's even strike, before the strike is being thrown.
Mm.
And so I think there is this ability to develop our consciousness to detect the subtle layers, maybe not the ultimate subtle layer, right? Because as that kind of schematic puts forth, there's the four, and each one, it's like a terraced
Yeah.
thing, right? So maybe we could just get up to the next level.
Have you ever
And
heard of like spiral dynamics or the work of Dr. Claire Graves? Um, it's like these steps of evolution of consciousness, and once you get to the highest levels, you're almost able to kind of what you're talking about, not like precognition per se, but these subtle things, like almost like you're having a conversation with somebody, you know what they're going to say next. And some people would just say that you're just good at reading people, which, I think that that's an art in itself, but I think that you're talking about like physical things too, like actions and not just words or thoughts or something like that, because I think if you know somebody really well, like your spouse or, your friend or something like that, you might already know some of their built-in tendencies and the way they think or something. But you're talking about like even like during like martial arts or physical activity, having that same, and if, I guess it could be for sports too. You're talking about athletes and stuff like that. If you're a wide receiver and you're playing a defensive back, and you're running routes, the defensive back is probably going to know some of your moves, right? But those little subtle little instinct things, maybe not so much. Is that kind of what you're talking about?
I was actually having this. I was the skeptic to an intuitive, and I was like, well, she was telling me that I'm very intuitive. I'm like, well, I think I'm just really good at making observations, and I know people well, and she said, your eyes tell you that. Your eyes want to come off as valuable, is what she was
Right.
saying. But so sometimes you're right. It's more of experiential, and is it a smell, is it a visible thing? But you're on that field so much that you know what's going to be 3 steps ahead. You've seen this play before, you've seen the look in their eye, whatever it is. And then sometimes it's also like she said, it's maybe not my eyes necessarily. It's not your eyes necessarily. It's something else, right? And
Mm.
maybe this can be detected when out of nowhere. Well, this is also arguable, but out of nowhere, two people say the exact same thing,
Mm.
right? Like, why are we both thinking that right now?
Right.
There's different levels of um, suggestive kind of proof of these things, but none of it is proof, because that's the conundrum of consciousness. It's not tangible, right?
Mm. Yeah. For who? Oh, my cousin Maurice. Not this cousin Maurice, but my other cousin Maurice.
The other Maurice Hogan.
And there's another Maurice. There's two of them out there. Shout out to Maurice, the other one. We were camping, and he was telling me about this book, and I think I picked it up. I forgot if I read the whole thing or not, but it's this guy who figured out that there's only so many options for certain actions and thoughts and things like that. Like there's just this branch. So if
Mm-hmm.
you know about the branch and all the different options, you can then start to like predict the future in certain ways. Kind of what we're talking about now. I gotta look that up. I gotta
That
figure
makes
out.
that makes complete sense, and maybe I can relate that too to what you said prior about the spiral energy.
Yeah.
Um, in a simplistic um, understanding, but also in a martial arts or movement sense, there's 4 ways to move. And I relate these to the dimensions of geometry, but you can just think about it as stillness and straightness, right? So the point and the line, right? There's the linear movement
Mm.
rather than straight. That's a better way to describe it. Excuse me. And then there's the circular, right? And then the optimal, most effective manner to move is spiraling energy,
Mm.
right? And that's when there's a circle and a line, right? So it's coming at you, but it's also pushing one way and down, or one way and up, right? So it's the spiraling energy is certainly the most powerful, right? And when you know there's only certain ways to move, well, then that there's things that will be more effective, as you were describing.
Sure.
If you know how things might unfold, then you will kind of guess how they will most likely unfold, and what is best for the situation. You can be there before it happens.
Yeah, I mean, this is something I've been talking about on our podcast for a while, which is if you're interested in a lot of the subjects we talk about, which is like mysteries and metaphysics and things like that, where do these ideas come from? And if you start to look at the origins of things, whether it's the origin of philosophy, the origin of wherever they think superstition came from, wherever they think religion came from, wherever they think, all these different things, science, all that stuff. If you learn how that evolved, you can then apply that to most things, and it becomes just a way of thinking. So you know the origins of things and how they progress, and then it carries over, kind of what you're talking about. Once you know that, it kind of just that's just a new thought process for yourself. So that's kind of what I've been. I see just a lot of people commenting on things on the internet and like, oh, I believe this or I believe that, but they won't even use Google or the internet or whatever and look up how it started. You know, like we're all people, right? You're a person, Maurice is a person, I'm a person. We all have origins. We all have, you know, there's always this strand or causal line of how we learned what we learned, and that goes all the way back through time for everything. So if you can, you know, we won't know exactly how things went down in the ancient world or stuff like that, but if you kind of have a basis of what we do know, you can then go from there and kind of piece things together. So I think that would it takes some of the mystery out of it. So maybe it's not for everybody if you're entertained by just the mystery aspect of it. But if you really are after like truth or some sort of objective truth, if that even exists, then I think that's the way to do it, in my opinion.
And I think we are inundated with so many answers that looking into things almost becomes like something that people don't even do, right? And
Yeah, you
so
have to
like
cross-reference. It takes time. I mean, you have to look through
yeah,
what's credible, what's not. You know, you have to go through the whole gambit of things.
and that's just current events.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
so then so
Current
then
event
you
type things.
yeah, sorry, right? And so all of the well, I think that is something that is really indicative of consciousness is asking the right question. Like the emperor wears no clothes or what have you, or it's always out of the mouth of babes that just make a simple observation and ask what is unsaid question or a taboo. And so I think we are at that a lot of times at
Yeah,
that
no,
place.
I think that we just, I don't know. I think about it both ways. Sometimes I think it's just me, like I just need to give it up and just do my own thing and just not worry about what other people are doing. But it's hard for me to look at the internet with all the fighting. I just, like
Yeah,
that's
we
what.
all get caught up in that hoopla, though.
No,
You
I
know,
mean, but it's just like people knew about this in the ancient world, and I, whatever. I've beaten this idea to death, but you can even go back to Plato. Like, there's a reason why people still talk about Plato and his relevance to philosophy and philosophy of mind and morals and ethics and all sorts of things, because there's this thing called Aristic Rhetoric, and I think it's from the dialogue Euthydemus, where these two brothers are fighting, and Socrates kind of uses Socratic method, and they're using words to win arguments and twist words to kind of win the argument, but they're not actually
Yeah.
after truth or trying to debate in like a real way, if that makes sense. And that's
No,
kind
that
of,
makes total sense.
we see Aristic Rhetoric on the internet all day long. It's just people fighting and using language to win arguments, and there's no actual truth behind what they're doing. So for me, it's like I have to get used to, I think, just the idea that that's just the world we live in, and use our podcast to talk about it, and critique it and do that. And that's probably what all those people were doing back then too. So I mean, it just is
And
what
I
it is.
think, I mean, my mind is stuck on it. Like I said, I'm cursed by of always thinking about Matrix of Four, but I think it's this false sense of polarity, this doad that the Pythagoreans spit about,
Right,
right?
right.
And when we're in that one-sidedness, it's automatically there's two, and that is a limiting factor for any discussion or observation, right? Because you end up being partisan slash what's the root of that? Obviously, it's partial. So you don't when as soon as you're partisan through a thing, you're completely partial minded, right? So the duality of polarity, even though it just sounds redundant at first, it's actually freeing of polarity,
Mm.
right? It's meant to be inclusive for all the possibilities to determine what might be a best outcome, not to be, if you got to have a hot shower, that's just or whatever. It's
Right,
hot or cold.
right.
So it's a
Yeah, I
way
don't
to
know.
really
I just think it's like dogma on all sides. Like if there's any sort of dogma, you should just be an open-minded person is what it comes down to. Like nobody has all the answers. Yeah, science is great. It gives us a lot of tools, and we've gotten pretty far here with it. And even, the progression of technology has been exponential over the last few hundred years. But I would say that even science, it's always evolving. Like, learn the philosophy of science. Understand how these things go. Not everything is always set in stone, and everything keeps evolving. And you see this in people, whether it's people writing about esoteric topics or science or whatever. They'll write a book and they'll still be defending those ideas 30 years later. Like, no, you need to keep moving. Quit putting all your eggs in one basket and get this show back on the road. Because I think that when you start doing that, that's when like knowledge dies. You're not really trying to learn anything new. You're just trying to preserve old ideas. So
I like to say different times require different minds.
yeah,
And like if we're all like pursuing collectively or individually, hopefully we're doing this. If not, we're not. I don't know what we're doing. But if we're all climbing to the peak, so to speak, or trying to better ourselves individually and collectively, sometimes there's a different view, right?
mm,
Sometimes what you see over there, I'm on the whole
sure,
different.
Uh-oh.
So when we see the same situation but from a different place, or there's differing situations on the same mountaintop, we might get into an argument over, like the Sufi story of the elephant, right? Where everyone's feeling a different part of the elephant, and one person thinks it's a snake, one person thinks that it's a big blob, the other person feels its ear and thinks it's like a bat, right? They all have this misconception of the elephant as a whole.
mm,
So sometimes what is true is multiple things. The
sure,
elephant kind of, it does have a big weird ear that would make you think it was a bat if you never saw it and felt it in the middle of the night, and so forth. I find this with Tai Chi, that it how that it relates to so many things, but yet there will be divergences of opinion within Tai Chi, right? There's
yeah.
also the nuanced differences as well as you go.
I would say that analogy or allegory would make more sense from an idealistic standpoint, but given the world that we live in, like in ancient times, they didn't have the internet for people to see this or that or a million other thoughts. And so I agree with what you're saying, but I do think that there is some version of right and some version of wrong. While it might skew a little bit this way or skew a little bit that way, there are people that are just generally wrong. Again, they didn't look up
Oh,
anything. They just want to. It's like Dunning Kruger run wild. They think that they just know better and they haven't done any research or they don't know anything about the topic. So I agree with you. It depends on what it is. If you and I are having a conversation and we disagree on something, I would say that that's a good example. But if it's some of the stuff I'm seeing out there, some of the garbage, I would say that that's not the case at all. I would say that that's cognitive bias run wild, and I think that that's part of the problem.
sure. And you make me think about how people have a skewed sense of morality. I tend to I don't know what I said, but I agree with what you said 100%. So what I found is that a lot of people have the idea that morality can shift, right? Like, oh, it was, 80 years ago they didn't know it was wrong. No,
Yeah.
exploitation has always been wrong,
Well, you were
and
mentioning the
certain things.
mountain, though. The mountain, and then people seeing two different views, and they're both kind of right from different angles,
Oh,
kind of
sure,
thing.
sure.
And I would say I would agree with that with what we're talking about, you and I. But when you take that to more people or people that aren't experts or haven't really done research on a topic or whatever,
You're right.
it's just again, it's just noise. It's
Mm,
just cognitive bias, and I think that that's the biggest problem out there. Is there's just so much noise. There's not enough um, experts. If you're going to talk about
oh,
something, you should have at least a basis of knowledge of what you're talking
Well,
about.
everybody's an expert now,
No, that's what I'm
You got,
saying.
yeah,
Is
right.
Dunning Kruger run wild?
Well, no, I see what you're saying. I was more talking about the different shades of esoteric interpretation
Sure.
rather than perspective of whatever it might be, and
Sure.
that sometimes whether depending on where we are culturally or physically, things might be quite different physically, not necessarily
Well,
perceptively.
that's there again. I agree with you because
Yeah.
you know what you're talking about. You've looked into these things. You've done research. You've thought about these things deeply, and that's why we have people on our podcast that we have, because those are generally people that know what they're talking about. They put in the research. They either have a good basis of knowledge or a nuanced take on something or something like that. I don't like, again, the dogmatic stuff or people that think they just know all the answers. Like, that's a huge turnoff in terms of knowledge and trying to get through to other people. And yeah, I don't know. I think that even sometimes like these kinds of conversations can turn people off because they'll be like, oh, these people are acting like they know it all. But what we're trying to say is I don't know more, but I would like to see more people out there learn more, is what I'm saying, because I think that we can have more conversations that are centered around actual knowledge as opposed to just hearsay or repeating or parodying ideas or whatever, something they saw on TV or one documentary or one article or whatever. So.
And I think essentially the only thing that is permanent is impermanence, right? And so everything is in flux, and people that are steadfast about a concept, especially the idea of monotheism as a whole, eventually you're going to be wrong if you're monothematic, right? If you're one way type of person about moving a refrigerator, eventually you can't move it that way, right?
Well, yeah, and
So
I would point out though too, like with what I mentioned is true. What I mentioned is what I think is true, which is that you always have to keep evolving these ideas. But let's say you wrote a book on one specific idea. If you want to keep writing more versions of that same topic and more updated with the research or the times or different perspectives, I think that's fine. I don't have a problem with that kind of stuff. It's, again, these, like you mentioned, you started moving a refrigerator a certain way 30 years ago and they've come out with brand new dollies or this or that and things that make it so much easier. It's like, well, what are you doing, at this point, kind of a thing. So
and I keep on finding the value in sets of four via these philosophical tools to inspire just that. And I might have mentioned it last time we spoke, but there are the four thoughts. And in Buddhism, one of the foundational sets of ideas is called the four thoughts. And it's, I guess, so distinct that that's all they need. But one
sure.
of them is impermanence. Um, the first is precious human body, and the second is impermanence.
Hmm.
And then the third is uh, uh,
No.
and so impermanence is the first. The second is cause and effect. Excuse me. The third is karma, which is cause and effect, and the fourth is samsara, or the mess that you're in, that we're all in. Samsara is the result of cause and effect, the universe, essentially, right? But the Buddhists go into it of the cause and effect nature of suffering and so forth from there. But the four thoughts, in a primal sense, are very useful to conceive our limitations and understand, not get caught up in our own convinced of our own understanding. We want to question our anything that's monothematic, if you will.
So, I mean, even that, there's still some sort of separation happening, right? There's four distinct things. Um, well, how do you feel about like Vedanta, where it's like this one thing and they just created terms to help people conceptualize that one thing by breaking it down into other things. Is that similar to what you're talking about, or is Buddhism, they are distinctly different things?
Well, I think that the encapsulation idea is really commonplace in Buddhism as well, from Hinduism, right? So,
Right.
the often enough, I think that there is even a fourth. When there's a set of three, there might be a fourth aspect that is the encapsulation, and when there's a set of four, there might be a fifth aspect that encapsulates them all.
Hmm.
Is what I found in looking into the smaller sets that Buddhism proposes, and there are many sets of four. Um, the Another set of four that is used with the four thoughts is the imponderables, and this is or excuse me, the immeasurables, the four immeasurables, and this is how Buddhism initially interprets what is love. And there's love for self, love for others, love for the happiness of others, and love for all in equanimity.
Hmm.
And you can kind of see that there's this geometric fourfold construct unfolding in that set of four particularly, in relation to the point, line, circle, and spiral idea.
Hmm.
Um, um, so it's that those two sets of four are actually used just to ponder reality on the daily. They'll use those sets of four. How did these interplay with my life? And I mean, many people from Mark Twain to Buddha have talked about how, and Pythagoras and Pythagoreans, how considering what we did at night is a really positive way to end the day and engage our consciousness, and then in the morning also considering what our plan of course might be.
Hmm. Interesting. Um, to pivot a little bit here before we kind of tie it up here and end it, I just want to hear a little bit about the Tao of or the Tao. I don't know how you pronounce Tao
Wow.
of Thoth.
I was As a Tai Chi practitioner, there's the Bagua, right? That is the series of eight trigrams that surround the Tai Chi. Eight linear symbols, right? That surround the yin yang symbol, rather, which is the Tai Chi. Excuse me. And so, in looking at the Bagua, I was seeing a set of seven in the Eastern Hermetics.
Hmm.
And the Bagua and Tai Chi system is essentially a system of hermetics, of self-development and growth, right? And self responsibility also. Both of these systems shared so many intrinsic values and subtle lessons that I was looking for, where there was the intersection or rather parallel. But with the Kybalion as a illustrative seven, there's often the seven hermetic principles, and seven also the seven hermetic principles are also related to the chakra system, which there are the seven main ones. And so there are all these seven planets that the ancients observed, and 777. But uh, as I was looking into this, I saw um, uh, uh, presentation by Mark Passio, and he included actually the eighth hermetic lesson. That is, if you encapsulate, going to this theory of encapsulation that we remarked about pertaining to four and five, and now eight. If you encapsulate the seven circles of the flower of life with another circle, that would be symbolically related to this eighth aspect of the Hermetic lessons, which is care or love, or as I call it, patient caring,
Mm.
right? Because you have to have patience to really employ these Hermetic lessons. And so, with Mark Passio's inspiration and with the Tai Chi Bagua learning, I was looking into the relationships of the set of eight. And I then found what was to me a striking fact that Hermopolis, which is the name from where the Thoth energy of Hermes gets its name. Hermopolis means the city of eight, and that is the city of eight neters, which are the natural primal energies or gods of ancient Egypt, the eight neters. And these eight neters are reflective of actually four pairs of masculine and feminine, to really simplify it, and also reflect the Bagua energy of these eight elemental natural forces.
Mm. So,
Um,
I mean, is there anything that specifically ties to like the attributed personality or archetypes of Thoth, like, the trickster element, or, the bringer of knowledge? He was associated with, language, which back then was like a massive shift in consciousness, having to, that was basically a technology, was written, the hieroglyphs and stuff. And anybody who doesn't know who Thoth is, he's the Egyptian, or, Thoth's the Egyptian god with the ibis head, and usually with like a little scroll or a little pen or whatever they're writing with, scribe. But yeah, is there any sort of connection to that, like any of the archetypes
abs-
associated?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And this was another stunning find for me as I'm exploring the idea of the relationships between East and West via Thoth, and finding also, to interject myself, finding that Thoth energy elsewhere, not just in Hermes, but Odin also has this Thoth relationship. But if in China, in the ancient Taoist belief system, there is the god Fu-Zi, and his feminine counterpart Nuwa, and they are depicted as spiraling snakes,
Hmm.
just as the spiraling snakes are on the staff of Hermes. And the Fuzi and Nuwa are responsible for the Bagua, or the I Ching, which is the oldest, one of the oldest still read books on the planet, the I Ching. And the I Ching is all about combining the eight energies into 64 potentials, into a divination process. So Thoth, Odin, and Fuzi and Nuwa of Taoist origin all have divination aspects to them, and as well as developing civilization in numerous manners, giving credit for medicine, and metaphysics, and even the uh, water, in China and Egypt specifically.
Hmm.
Both Fuzi and Thoth are given credit for developing the water systems as well.
Yeah.
So striking Thoth energy in the Fuzi and Nuwa.
Yeah, that's interesting. Um, yeah, I
And
know.
and then there's the sixth. Sorry, go
No,
ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think that there's what did I read like a long time ago, when we were getting into this, and I was reading more, fringe books, and I think it was like Thoth the Atlantean or something like that, and it just seemed like it seemed like the Kabbalion just mixed with like other, just like basic, like as so below, as above, or as above, so below type stuff, and frequencies and energies and just things like that. Again, it seemed like a version of the Kabbalion or something like that.
Well, one
But
thing I built on with the Tao of Thoth, besides relating the East and West, is having mannerisms to embody the lessons, which is really what Tai Chi is all about, really embodying philosophy. And so I do relate and improve on, for instance, with the polarity presentation in the Kabbalion. That's another uh, place where people actually interpret it as being a doad or the two, right? But if you read the way it's presented in its thesis, it kind of could read there's duality of polarity, but it's the fourth rule, or the fourth tenet as presented in the Kabbalion, not the second, which is interesting, right? But so the one of the things that I think I build on is the polarity idea, of course, right? Because of the matrix of four. But also I bring about ways to embody these lessons in Tai Chi, Qigong practice and concepts.
right. Yeah, and what I was mentioning is some people you might hear, uh, of Hermes Trismegistus or Thoth thrice or something, like, it's just this idea that Thoth was Thoth in ancient Egypt, then reincarnated as Hermes in ancient Greece, and then reincarnated as this, I don't even know what you would call, like a hermetic alchemist or something, known as Hermes Trismegistus. So, yeah, I mean, that's, I guess you'd have to believe in reincarnation or some sort of.
I've noticed there's a lot of
But people take liberties with it, right? Like, I mean, people get really out there with
yeah.
some of the.
Oh yeah.
There's a lot of contrived elements with the Thoth presentation, is what I noticed, and anything Egyptian, really, right?
Yeah, of course.
There's a lot of misnomers that are perpetuated because they're kind of neat,
Yeah.
right? Like I've noticed the archontic or archons has
Yeah, we
become
were just talking about that with like Gnosticism and this, people, I see people on Twitter associating like archons with like gray archetype extraterrestrials and stuff like that. And it's like, why do you even know like where that came from, kind of a thing, and it's more of like
it's
a
like
metaphysical concept than it is like an embodiment of a physical thing, so.
and it's like where people would say, "Oh, it's Mercury is in retrograde." It's the archons, and oh, it's the halls of Amenti.
Yeah.
But I found it striking with the Hermopolis meaning the city of eight, pertaining to the eight meters. I found that kind of a concrete arrow rather than some of the more contrived stuff,
Again,
often
a
enough.
lot of that other
Um,
stuff is literally people just reading a couple things and drawing connect, it's like pareidolia of the mind. It's looking for that connection, or uncovering what you think is this big mystery, like nobody's ever thought about that or read those 2 books or read those 3 books or whatever, so yeah, no, I agree with you. People take a lot of liberties. And to be honest with you, when we started this podcast, I was reading that stuff as kind of not as like necessarily truth, but just like with more of an open mind. And now that I've looked into a lot of these things and the actual
right.
texts and things like that, it takes on a whole different meaning. And that doesn't, and I want to point this out too, and it's not to take the magic or the mystical or the mysticism out of it, because I do think that there is those elements in there. I think that's what people get wrong about with science and philosophy. They think it has to be this dry, non-interesting thing or whatever. And I think that's just the communication from academia side of it. I think that there is elements that truly are mysterious and interesting and weird connections and things like that. But I don't think that you can look at two things if you don't know what you're talking about and take away some of these ideas, like you mentioned, that people are talking about. So.
Yeah, I mean, we like to prognosticate, don't we? So the less partisan we are, the better are going to be our prognostications. I
Yeah.
found, right? The more, and so again, I know that I'm biased and I'm psychotic with it, but the more I realize the matrix of four, it lessens my partisanship
Dude,
and
4 years from now, you better not be
prejudices.
talking about this anymore. You better be on to something else.
No, it'll be 8 years is when it
Yeah.
all comes back.
Yeah, the Matrix of 8.
Yeah, well, there's some things that, like Occam's razor rule suggests, is it's the when it's simple, it's not necessarily improvable,
Right.
right?
No,
And
I
and
do think
in
there
the
is like universe, like I said, like Plato. There's a reason why some of their
that's
philosophies
yeah,
are still relevant to this day. I believe that,
sure.
but it's not a ton of things, right? It's like some real core basic concepts that people will then add a bunch of stuff onto. It becomes more complex and convoluted and things like that. So I do agree with what you're saying. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. I was
No,
just
no, I
joking
get
around.
it. No, I get it. And what I've found is the oldest, most basest ones, whether it's the yin yang, or the cross, or the allegory of the cave. All of these things, they happen to have four at its basis, but not only four. There's all kinds of other things going on, but in the beginning, as a basis, four is this neat starting point that it seems a lot of the philosophical, metaphysical precepts and concepts start with.
Hmm.
But it's not the only thing. It's just like a table has four legs. It's a great basis.
Sure. Well, let's wrap it up there then. That sounds good.
Cool.
And yeah, it's
We gotta
super
get
fast.
we gotta get him on it all once a month. This is
Yeah.
good stuff.
I
No,
really enjoy our
I so
conversations.
appreciate you guys. Yeah, thank
Yeah.
you for. I know you guys had a super busy day, so thank you
Yeah.
for making time for me to come
Yeah, it was
on and
just this
put me
technical
in there.
stuff. Yeah, figuring out this technical issue that we found. But I think we figured it out now, so we should be good. And I'm gonna be
Bringing it back
busy.
to the Matrix. We don't want to be slaves to the world. I mean,
Uh,
is the Matrix your favorite movie? I'm a big movie buff.
Nah, no, not really. But the matrix, it implies a web, right?
Yeah.
And what I was looking at, even though it has a parallel, is that the matrix is this unfolding, sequentially repeating. And so I kind of think of the matrix of four as actually a way to cut through the matrix of the cliche, right? Of the kind of web idea. And in that, the four actually, it looks like a blade.
hmm,
Hmm.
The four looks like a blade with a handle, and just like Occam's razor, it kind of slices away the superfluous.
hmm.
Beautiful.
Great way to wrap it up. You can find Ethan. He's on Twitter. He's all over the place. I'll put some links down below to his books, and you can find him on the internet. I'll put those links down below. And yeah, thanks for coming on, and we'll get you back on again in the future. I'm going to be busy with my newborn here
Peace,
for
you
the
guys.
next couple months, but when we start doing live shows again,
Awesome.
we'll do a live one with you.
Yeah,
But
maybe in the beginning of
Yeah.
the year or something.
yeah,
Yeah,
so
yeah. Whenever I'm like I said, I know you guys had a busy day and it's late there, and I just really appreciate you guys putting me on
of
bothering
Well,
me.
course.
thank you.
And I
Thank
and
you.
I was listening to our last discussion. I was like, oh, this is definitely one of my favorite interviews
Oh,
I've
thanks,
done.
man. Yeah, I mean,
So
I remember
yeah,
I wanted to get you on for a while. Like I said, your stuff just happens. You get sidetracked. We had actually like
I hear
couple
you.
month hiatus and stuff. So it was just
Yeah,
tough to get back in the swing of things. But yeah, we're glad to
sure,
have you back
sure.
on, and you're welcome on anytime, and we'll figure that out
Cool,
again for the future.
cool.
But again, check out Ethan's stuff. And before we get out of here, one more time, everybody head on over to our Patreon at patreon.com/MindEscapePodcast. For just $2 a month, you'll get exclusive guest episodes and segments. We are also on Discord, so find us on Discord if you want to chat. I was doing Twitter Spaces for once a week or so, but I'll probably put that aside when I have our babies coming here soon this week. So I'll figure that out sometime in the future again to start doing that. And head on over to indrasweb.org. This is a social media platform we created to connect open minds. If you want to hypothesize, speculate, theorize, it's a perfect place to do it. Go set up a profile. We are still trying to work on getting it in the App Store. I will let everybody know when that happens. And if you're interested in winning this Mind Escape t-shirt, all you have to do is go to Apple Podcasts, leave a 5-star review, and take a screenshot of it, and then send the email to mindescapepodcast@gmail.com, and that will enter you to win. And if you're interested, we have a merch store now. So all you have to do is go to mindescapepodcast.com and click on the merch link. I also will have a link down below the video. We got some awesome shirts up there. I just created a shirt with, with Anubis, and it says "We are living, breathing magic." On top, it's pretty interesting. I've made one with the Portara of Naxos. We've got one hashtag Let Maurice Speak, which he didn't get to speak tonight, and I'm not going to let him speak ever again. There's just tons of cool stuff up there. So if you're interested, go check out our merch store. But we love everybody. Stay safe out there, and we'll catch you next time. Peace.
Peace.
Much love.